You've found your way to the Winning Tactics podcast with host Adam Sinkus. Adam discusses winning tactics with small business owners and entrepreneurs, uncovering processes and introducing the tools and solutions for enhancing the bottom line. Thanks again for finding your way to the Winning Tactics podcast, and now your host, Adam Sinkus.
What is going on, everybody? Happy Thursday. Excited to be here. We've made it through almost another week. Just want to apologize for not being on Tuesday. I had a last-minute cancellation, but we are back today, Thursday. I'm excited to have Brandy Booth with us. Brandy has taken a journey in the travel industry, which we all know has been hit super, super hard with this, and so it'd be interesting to learn her perspectives on what's happened in the travel industry, what that may look like going forward, as well as she has also taken an opportunity to transition into her family's small business as well, and kind of talk a little bit about that as well. So Brandy, welcome to the show. Excited to have you. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Adam. It's very nice to be here. I'm so excited to get this opportunity to speak with you and your audience. And I know we're all going to take something away from this. So that's really exciting. My name is Brandy, like he mentioned. I have recently decided to start my own podcast called The Business Booth. I'm still in the process of getting it all up and going. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to speak on Adam's podcast, because it seems like he has a really good ground under him. So like he mentioned, I work for a hotel chain, and I was furloughed when all of this started. So yeah, I've had the chance to get back involved with my family's small business. And honestly, I've been around small business all my life. My parents are entrepreneurs. My grandfather does his own business. So it's just nice to kind of be back at home mentally, even though I don't live at home. So it's been fun to get back in a familiar ground, even with all this uncertainty going on.
Yeah, that is absolutely awesome. It is. I think it's challenging. I know, like, after obviously not living in my parents' house for quite a while now, like I couldn't go back to that world. But right. I think when you're working in the family business, and my best friend growing up, his family was like my family, and I spent probably too much time in their family business doing odds and ends. So I get a little bit of where that comes from. It does feel familiar, feels comfortable as well. But let's start with the travel industry, because I think that's interesting. In working in hotels, obviously, as all this has gone on, there's been a very significant drop in room reservations and just travel in general. So, what are your thoughts on, what's happened so far? Are hotels going to see their way out of this, or is this kind of going to be a change in pace for them?
That's a really good question. So hotels are having to evolve rapidly. They're having to get on board with changes. Guests aren't traveling the same way they used to. And for a while going forward, they aren't going to be traveling the way they used to. When all of this started, a lot of our leadership mentioned, it's similar to the way it was, the way 9/11 impacted hotels. It's similar to the way 2008, the recession, impacted hotels. But as it's progressed, everyone has decided that it's actually a lot worse in the way those two events impacted the hospitality industry, not just hotels, but airlines as well. It's going to take the hospitality industry a long time to get past this, to get through it. They're having to make some really hard decisions about who to cut, who to keep, who to furlough, who to lay off, whether it be temporary or permanently. And everyone's just having to make a lot of hard changes. There are going to be a lot of hotels that aren't going to make it out. Some may choose not to reopen at all. A lot of it is the ownership, because most hotels are owned by a small little ownership group, but managed by a big company like Hilton, Marriott, et cetera. So those management companies are having to work with the ownership and figure out when the hotels can open, if they will reopen, and what are kind of the parameters to get them to reopen. So the hotel that I work at, they did not want to reopen until they could hit a monthly average occupancy of 10%. And believe it or not, that is really, really hard to hit right now for a lot of markets, a lot of properties. We're a convention center hotel. We were used to running average 80% all the time. And then when conventions come in, obviously you skyrocket to being sold out, oversold, etc. But that 10% number is just really hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around, because it doesn't seem, to people who don't work in hotels, they're like, oh, it's just a number. But 10% compared to 80%, that's a big difference.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, I have a couple other friends in the hotel industry, and I've heard numbers right along the lines of, from a yearly occupancy, most hotels, if they hit like that 50 to 60% mark of average occupancy over the year, like that seems to be a good number. Is that a fair assessment for most hotels, or?
A lot of that is really dependent on the market and what kind of customers you're catering to. So, like I said, we're a convention center, but we're also in a suburb of Atlanta. So we cater to a lot of business travelers, business transients, and then transient guests, because Atlanta has the Braves, the baseball team. And so we're a big hotel around when the Braves come into town. So that was another thing that impacted us, was not only was it the coronavirus, but then it just, skyrockets and keeps going after that. So the MLB season was put on hold, and I'm not even sure if they've ever decided to move it forward at all. So
I think they're talking about it, but I haven't heard anything official. They're talking about like a 50 or 60 game season is the last I heard about it. And which means the Tigers actually might stand a chance this year, because that's about that's about as many games as they've played in the last 5 or 6 years actually played. The rest of them, they just kind of show up. So they're just there. But so I agree with you. So occupancy is obviously, that's the gold standard of what matters for hotels. It's also a big piece of what matters in restaurants as well. And so let's talk a little bit about what occupancy actually means for people that aren't familiar with that.
Yeah, so hotels obviously have a certain amount of rooms. So let's say this hotel has 525 rooms. Your standard occupancy is how many rooms occupied out of your 525, given that all 525 are going to be available to be sold that night. What hotels are having to do moving forward, especially larger hotels of that size and larger, are having to put out of order entire floors. That way it saves on power, water, everything like that. It saves on housekeeping labor. And that way they're just keeping certain floors in for sale and then saving all that labor and power. I know at one point ADR is always a big point for us, and ADR stands for average daily rate. Hotels from certain brands and companies, et cetera, want to make sure their rates are at a certain point in line with the competition in the area. So everyone says, well, why don't you just drop the rate and you'll get tons of guests, just drop that rate down real low and everybody's going to come flocking to that hotel. But you can't do that with certain brands and stuff like that. You still want to uphold your brand standards, make sure you really are representing the brand hotel that you have. But we were talking about occupancy. Let's get back to that. So when it comes to hotels and reservations, cancellations, occupancy is definitely one thing that owners and management companies were looking at when they were thinking about reopening. But it was also in regards to reservation rates versus cancellation rates. So then in that sense, how many new reservations are you getting versus how many simultaneous cancellations are you getting? They really didn't even want to entertain the idea of opening a hotel back up until that ratio was about 1-to-1, because for a while there was one new reservation to every 15 to 20 cancellations.
Oh, geez, that's that could be a challenging space.
Right.
So that's definitely very, very smart to be thinking about that aspect of it. Also want to kind of talk about and circle back, because this, I think, plays into that pricing and occupancy and all that stuff. And you mentioned saving labor. How much labor is actually, say a 400 or 500 room hotel, how much labor is actually there in a day, right? Because I would fathom a guess that it is probably a lot more than what we see.
Yeah, so I come from the rooms department. I'm a rooms operations manager, which is kind of like a front office manager. So I oversee front desk, bellmen, and then the phone operators and runners. So they deliver room service orders. I'm trying to remember what all I do because it's been so long since I've been to work. So really my labor standpoint comes from that. But we always keep 2 people on the front desk per shift, and there's 3 shifts a day. We keep 1 runner on every shift, and they usually only run 2 shifts a day, at least 2 bellmen on shift. So you can see just from the front office of the entry and exit point of a guest, there's a good bit of labor there, including, adding in supervisors, managers, etc. So you have front office, you have engineering, you have food and beverage, housekeeping, you have all of your admin, sales, events. It adds up quick, believe it or not.
Yeah,
So
no,
a lot of costs there.
I can imagine that. I can imagine, housekeeping and food service are probably, from a labor standpoint, probably the 2 biggest cost centers.
Definitely, yeah. Housekeeping, they use a lot of materials as well. So cleaning a room is a lot more than just the labor that goes into doing it. It's all of the guest supplies, the linens, the cleaning supplies, all of those little one-use or reusable, however the hotels do it, little soaps and stuff. And when it comes to power, running the elevators to get up and down to all of those floors to clean that stuff. So it does add up.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting. You talk about materials, and obviously linens and things like that are reusable materials, but there's still a cost associated with that as well, correct?
Exactly.
So let's circle back to, I thought it was really interesting. You started talking about rates, and people are like, yeah, just drop your rates and the world will flood in, right? And that's that is an interesting concept that I think a lot of people fail to understand the total impact of, right? From a branding standpoint, from a brand reputation, from a revenue standpoint, from a profit standpoint. Obviously in small businesses, when you offer product, you offer it at a rate that works for your business. But when companies start discounting, what does that do? Like in a hotel, what does discounting a room below market value do for the hotel?
Yeah, it's one thing you really have to be cognizant of in the long run, not just how it's going to affect your business or hotel right this second. Because in hotels in particular, you want to bring in the right crowd. If you have a 4 or 5-star hotel, you just got to be very careful about the rates that you supply and who's going to be taking those rates, what kind of damage they may or may not do to the guest room, how they may or may not treat other guests. And you just have to be really careful about that, about the brand. Like I mentioned earlier, you wouldn't have, I don't know, what's a top hotel brand, maybe a Ritz-Carlton. They would not be selling at a maybe Motel 6. I think that's a hotel chain, a Motel 6 rate, just because that's not the kind of service they offer. They have to pay those employees Ritz-Carlton wages, whereas Motel 6 pays Motel 6 wages. So you can just see that, just in that general statement, you can see that the expectations are so much different out of staff. So you want to bring in guests that are wanting to get what they pay for. That phrase, you get what you pay for, is, it goes across all industries, but in hotels, it's very much that. One thing I always tell my friends is they want to stay in cheap hotels or something that aren't on my discount, just cheap hotels. And I say, well, if that room, let's do some math here. If that room is $40 per night, they have to pay the mortgage, they have to pay the power, they have to pay the front desk, they have to pay a housekeeper. How much of those funds are actually going towards housekeeping and cleanliness, when really it's all just going to go to the mortgage at that point? So that's one thing I like to tell people to keep in mind, is think about that cost. You will get what you pay for. So
I think that's interesting. One of the things I've always looked at when it comes to pricing, right, is there's advantages for dropping prices, but there's also, I think, a lot of disadvantages from a total market standpoint too, especially, in hotels, right? If all the Hiltons in the area or all the Hilton properties in the area start dropping their rates 5 to 10%, everybody else has to respond to that in some way, shape, or form. Everybody else in the industry has to respond to that. And typically what that looks like is a devaluation of the service offered for the whole market, right? And so Everybody wants to make as much money as possible, so you have to balance all that out, and that's that's the interesting piece that I think a lot of people don't look at the macro impact of what a cost reduction in their rates would do.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up because in a lot of industries, it's this way, but in hotels, when you're located in a certain area with a bunch of other hotels, whether they're part of your management company or not, the general managers and the leadership of those hotels all talk. They all become friends because they don't want to be that hotel that does what you just mentioned to everyone else. They don't want to kill all the business because they're dropping the rates low to $59 per night when it should be $159. So that's a really big part of it. To be a good ethical business person, in my opinion, you can't be price gouging the competition. Be fair in your prices, be reasonable, try to meet your customers' expectations, but just keep in mind that you have a responsibility to your customers and to your other business owners in the area to be fair and ethical.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's interesting as well that, you talk about the ethics of making those decisions. My mind has always been around if I charge a little bit more, what additional can I offer that's going to bring that additional value? So maybe I don't drop my prices. Maybe I just increase my offering.
Right, exactly.
For that.
Customers have to know that if they're paying more, they're going to be getting more. If you can't offer more, you can't make them pay more. There is a difference between a higher quality product or service, but at the end of the day, you're exactly right. You can't charge more for the same thing and expect to come out on top. It just doesn't work like that.
So let's shift gears a little bit because obviously hotel industry went stagnant. You got furloughed, which is something. It's a story that a lot of people in a ton of different industries have dealt with. Here in Southwest Florida, we are I'm like 40 minutes from the Hertz World headquarters, right? And so
they're going through it.
They're going through it as well, and so I know people that have been impacted by that as well, and it's the same kind of thing. But you took this opportunity to re-enter yourself back into your family small business. So first and foremost, what is your family small business?
Yeah, they run an HVAC business, which is heating and air conditioning. My dad's been in the industry since before I was born, and I'm in my 20s. So that tells you he knows a lot about the industry. He has all the connections in the industry. He's done his time working for other companies in the industry and learning how to do things, how to be an employee, how to be a manager, and then, of course, how to run his own business. So he's made a lot of friends along the way and has made a lot of good customer followings along the way. So he's the owner. My little brother, who's really not so little, is the vice president, and my mom runs the office with other employees. We have a handful of technicians that go out and service homes. So it's interesting coming from obviously the corporate world. I didn't necessarily do a 9-to-5 or anything like that, but I came from a very solid corporate world to jumping back into a small business. But I think it's really important to have that corporate experience and then jump back into small business because you take so much with you from the corporate world, whether it be human resources practices, training, development, anything. It's just been really helpful for sure. Me and my mom have bounced a lot of ideas across each other and are really able to collaborate and find the right way to do things. So it's been interesting.
I think it's interesting you mentioned the how you bring the corporate world into the small business world, because one of the things that I've experienced in talking to small business owners is that a lot of them are great at what they do, but they're not so great at the policies and procedures and making tasks repeatable and things like that. So that the corporate world is very good at setting that up, right? So I think it's interesting you mentioned bringing that into play in the small business world because it's something that's often overlooked. So let's talk a little bit about how training can be, because corporate training is way different than how most small businesses train. Most corporate training is, there's some sort of classroom aspect, where everybody sits in a classroom or a conference room and for a day or 2 days or a week, depending on the industry, and learns a position, and then you go and you learn on the job and do that position, right? And obviously small businesses, you don't have those opportunities because you take like your HVAC technicians off the streets, pounding pavement for a day, and that's, big loss in revenues for you. So, so how have you thought about adapting some of those formal training pieces from the corporate world into the small business? Have you worked on that at all?
Funny enough, it's actually been quite the opposite. So you're exactly right when it comes to corporate training. Let's say I'm starting a front desk agent and I have them sit in front of a computer for 5 days, learning the computer system, watching videos, clicking through assessments. And then maybe 2 weeks later, they have to go to a brand training with a human resources brand trainer, sit through a classroom all day, blah, 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 go shadow on the front desk. And then maybe after a couple months, they finally catch on and can check someone in and out by themselves. Well, my dad is, like I said, he's a pro in HVAC. Like, it's kind of, wow, it's intimidating. But so he has it all figured out. He knows that not everything is going to be by the book when you're teaching someone. Not everyone learns the same way. And on that note, it's a trade. A trade is very, very different than just running a hotel or selling clothes. And I'm not devaluing any of that, but it takes time and skill to learn a trade. So a lot of the time, if he has to hire a technician, he won't hire you as a technician because you're coming from someone else's trade, learning their good or bad habits. And he wants to make sure he weeds all of that out before he sends you on your own to run service calls. So most people that he brings in who he eventually wants to be a technician, he starts them as what he calls a helper or an apprentice. That way they just kind of learn from the ground up. And that's usually when they have no experience. If they do have some experience, he'll kind of put them through a field test, let them run a couple service calls with very close oversight and kind of see how they do. So I really like the way he does things. It's all just on a trial basis. He may start you at a low rate, but here's one of the perks of a small business. If you start at a low rate, the owner is right there. If he sees you're doing well and you have that drive, he'll give you 50 cents or $1 raise after the first week or two. So it's definitely interesting. I would say I've learned more from him in that aspect. Obviously, I can't do all of that working for a corporation, but it's just interesting seeing how he's finding the right way for his business because it definitely works for him.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting, and I love the fact that he's bringing people in and going, you're going to start here, and this is the progression. It's a piece that a lot of small businesses, I think, an opportunity that a lot of small businesses lose out on because you see small business, you see small workforce, you see one or two management people, and then the owners, the ownership team. And so like, there's just not a lot of layers there like there is in corporate. Yeah. And so I love the fact that he's, building this like kind of path, like you're going to start here, but you can grow into doing this.
That's exactly it. And whenever he asked me to help him source applicants and stuff like that, that's one of the biggest things he leans on actually is that I may start you low, but if you show me your drive and desire to learn a trade, because learning a trade is something you can take with you for the rest of your life. No one can take away that knowledge from you of how to perform a trade. And that's one thing he likes to focus on when hiring is that if you just show me your drive to learn, the sky's the limit. I'll take you with me all the way, but I just need that drive from you and I'll take you. Let's go. So yeah, that's pretty admirable in my opinion.
No, I absolutely love it. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the HR side of the business because that is something, again, small businesses, we wear a ton of hats all the time, right? And so your operations manager may also be your HR department, your payroll department, your accountant,
yeah, exactly.
And everything else, right? And so what I've found is you have to be very systematic in approaching all of these things in order to really stay on top of them the way you need to. Yeah. And HR is definitely one of those places where I think being systematic is super important to make sure that everything is being followed from a legal standpoint to the T. So have you brought in any HR practices from the corporate world to help make sure everything rolls the way it should?
Yeah, so like I said, you hit the nail on the head. The HR stuff, as I call it, it's one of the biggest things I would say I brought to the table. Because as an operations manager, I oversee a lot of people, and I have to make sure HR in the corporate world, HR has to approve every single thing a manager does. And in the moment you think this is so excessive, can you let me just be a manager? I know what I'm doing. Just give me a break. Let me just do it. But it did help, honestly. It's that experience that I needed for one day to go open my own small business. So when I started with my parents, they had a technician who had a horrible attitude and would just pop off and say the worst things. It was just bad all around. So they would have to figure out how to write him up. And I was like, well, do you have a handbook? Does he know what the write-up process is? Does he know how many write-ups or warnings or whatever that he gets before it's the end of the line? They were like, oh, wait, we have to do that? I'm like, yeah, that's important. But I feel like a lot of small business owners don't take that stuff into account when they start a business. They're worried about how are we going to run the show and not the HR side of it. And it's something that I feel like a lot of small business owners need to have more insight on, is that you have to have someone that knows the legalities of the HR world, that knows how important it is to be consistent, because consistency is definitely key when you're working with employees. And plus, like, you may start a small business with 1 or 2 employees, but isn't the goal to grow that one day and to be booming? So you're going to have that stuff under your belt. And if you start with that, then you'll be good. So.
Yeah, you mentioned the handbook thing, and that's, that is something that I've seen a lot of failures on. They sort of, some business owners will say, yeah, I have a handbook, and it's like 4 pages and doesn't really outline anything.
Yeah.
And others will say, we never had a handbook because we never needed one. And it's like, wait a minute, what happens if, and you start asking the what if questions, and then you see the panic.
Adam, exactly. And the thing is, with a handbook, I mentioned like the legalities of HR. One thing that I would really recommend is just having a lawyer. What do they call it when you have a lawyer kind of like on payroll? There's a term for it.
I'm totally drawing a blank. A retainer.
Me too.
On retainer.
On retainer, that's it.
Yep.
Have a lawyer on retainer. It's going to be an expense, but it's a lesser expense than getting sued down the line, whether it be for employment practices or whatever. But I say that to say that if you create a handbook, have your lawyer look it over. It won't take them long, maybe an hour or 2. Have them look it over, have them make sure it could hold up in the court of law, because that's the one thing you have to remember about HR documents and practices. If it can't hold up in the court of law in case you get sued, then it does you no good. You just wasted all your time and energy making this handbook, writing these documents that are now not going to hold up at all. So.
Yep. And if you're not familiar with it, there are a ton of great resources out on the internet where you can get really good, like a really good, like starting handbook. Obviously you should be filling in things that are specific to your company, but there's a ton of great resources to at least get you started down that path. And I am always a proponent of, if you're not comfortable doing that, or you don't think you can do it the right way, hire somebody to do it.
Yep, exactly.
that is familiar. So we are getting towards the end of time here. So, definitely brought a lot of great information about the hotel industry and what's going on there. And then that transition of bringing the corporate world into the small business world, and how they how you can bring some of the things from the corporate world in play in the small business world to systematize and build. So, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on what you think, based on our conversation today, everybody should take away from this conversation.
So one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is the benefits or the differences of jumping straight into a small business versus having that corporate experience behind you. I really think that working in the corporate world, whenever I do get to start my own business, will have put me so far ahead of other small business owners who maybe jumped in straight out of college. Don't get me wrong, my college degree, I have an undergrad degree in business management, and it definitely taught me a lot about finances and a little bit about HR, but not enough that I could have done it by myself, honestly. But yeah, if you're thinking about starting a small business, think about taking a year or two to go work in a corporation and just learn how they do things. Obviously, a lot of that's proprietary information, but make it your own. Learn the processes, learn the foundations of the whys, and run with it in your own business. And that's what's going to take you far.
Absolutely love it. Great advice there. I think I've long said everybody should work in a call center or a restaurant at some point in their life. You learn so much about yourself. I'm going to add corporate America to that list as well.
Oh, yeah.
So, but great advice. So, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm in the process of building my Instagram page, the podcast or the Business Booth podcast, making a Facebook page. Like I said, I'm in the very early stages. But if you ever wanted to find me on LinkedIn, ask me questions, or be a guest on my podcast, you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Brandy Booth, and I would be happy to connect with all of you guys, answer questions, and just kind of chat back and forth and throw ideas off of each other, just like Adam and I have done.
Fantastic. So we'll be looking forward to seeing your podcast coming out in the future here. Do you have a timeline of when you're hoping to go live with that?
Yeah, so I'm sourcing some interview guests, just like I'm doing here. I'm trying to get my list together with some great entrepreneurs who have a lot to bring, to talk about their experiences and stuff. So I'm wanting to get my first couple episodes out by the middle of July. So we'll say July 15th. That's my first date, and you got to hold me to it, Adam.
Fantastic, exciting. So you'll be, I'm assuming once you get those launched, be probably on all the major platforms as well. But go check her out, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and I will attempt to drop some links here in the comments on LinkedIn as well. Let's see if I can get you to pop up because I haven't formally added you onto my LinkedIn yet. It's been a crazy day.
Yeah, it's been an interesting 24 hours.
I will make sure that here today I get you linked into the comments on the LinkedIn page as well, so that people can just go ahead and click on your name and find you. But definitely appreciate your time today. As always, appreciate the audience's time as well. And if you're on Team Replay, check us out. It'll be LinkedIn, Facebook, and I will eventually get this to my YouTube channel when I finally have time to put in all the stuff. If you love the show and love what we're doing here, support us, patreon.com/Adam Sinkus. Every penny goes back into helping make sure that we can continue this show. I am making a shift. I'm going from 2 days a week down to just 1 day a week on Thursdays. So we will see you all next Thursday at same time, same place, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Brandy, again, I appreciate your time today, and you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Adam. You too.